My name is Tiffany Ward. I'm 34, and for the last decade I've made a living keeping other people's big days from falling apart. I'm the one venues call when they can't afford chaos. My sister promised her future in-laws that I'd cover the entire wedding catering as a gift. Not help. Not a discount. The whole thing. She never asked me. She just built their dream reception on money that wasn't hers and work I hadn't agreed to do. When I found out, I told her no. Calm, clear, final. She didn't hear any of that. She heard an attack on the fantasy she'd sold them. "If you won't do it, then don't come," she snapped. "You only care about money." My mother said she was disappointed in me. My father called me selfish. According to them, I was ruining my sister's once-in-a-lifetime day because I refused to set my business on fire for her. I didn't scream. I didn't beg them to see my side. I just felt something in me click into place. "All right," I said. "I won't come." 3 weeks before the wedding, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails, unknown numbers, the venue, the planner, relatives I hadn't heard from in years. They all wanted the same thing from the one person they had already pushed out. I set the phone face down on my kitchen counter and let it buzz until the battery died. None of them realized that by the time they started panicking, the most important decision in this story had already been made. And not by them. Before I tell you what she said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. Work has always been the one part of my life that made sense. I started my company in my mid-20s with a second-hand laptop, a rented storage unit, and a hatchback that rattled when I turned the air on. That summer in Tampa was brutally hot, and venues were desperate for anyone who could keep outdoor weddings from turning into disasters. I was good at lists, at spotting weak points in a schedule, at seeing the moment when an evening would fall apart if nobody stepped in. One event led to the next until my name was the one people passed around when they needed a night to run without visible cracks. Over time, I built a small crew. Kiara came on first, a former banquet manager who could walk into an empty hall and map the whole evening in her head. Together, we turned borrowed racks into staging, found used refrigerators for backup cold storage, and learned which vendors needed reminders and which ones needed firm rules. We never cooked the food, but we were the reason it arrived where it needed to be. By the time I turned 30, we had steady contracts with several hotels, 2 waterfront venues, and the downtown Science Center. The Science Center quickly became my favorite. The event hall sat under high ceilings and suspended exhibits, with glass walls that looked out over the city. They hosted fundraisers, corporate galas, and weddings for families who wanted something impressive in public. Their staff treated our team as partners, and we repaid that trust by keeping their events tight. My parents were aware of all this in a loose, second-hand way. Relatives mentioned seeing my company's logo at galas, and my parents repeated those stories later. When they introduced me, it was usually with a vague line about event work before they moved the spotlight to my sister. Nicole had always filled that space. She moved through the world assuming it would make room for her. Later, it was a polished job title and photos that made her life look effortless. Where I collected contracts and updated insurance certificates, she collected attention. Our positions in the family followed from that. I was the one who would figure things out. She was the one whose feelings had to be protected. When something went wrong, the first question at home was how it would affect Nicole. It was easier to trust that I would manage on my own, and after enough years of that assumption, nobody questioned it anymore. The first time I heard about Timothy Hale, my mother had the phone on speaker. Nicole had met him through a mutual friend at a networking event for hospital staff. Timothy worked in healthcare administration and, according to my mother, came from a good, solid family. Later, I looked him up and saw a careful smile and a straightforward career. The Hales lived across the bay. Robert had spent his career in hospital operations, the kind of work that kept everything running without public credit. Elaine volunteered on local boards, including the Science Center's foundation. They cared about procedure, reputation, and doing things properly, a word my mother used every time she mentioned them. When Nicole and Timothy got engaged, the news arrived as a photo in a group text. Her ring was angled toward the camera, her grin wide, his expression slightly dazed. I sent a short reply and went back to my task list. Before the day was out, my mother called to narrate the proposal and the reaction from Timothy's parents. Plans started forming quickly. Possible dates, color schemes, suggestions from friends who had recently been bridesmaids. Somewhere in that stream, the Science Center moved to the top of their venue list. From a professional angle, it made sense. Elaine already knew the staff there and liked the idea of a wedding tied to a place that hosted school field trips and community events. The event hall relied on outside vendors for catering, rentals, and logistics, which meant plenty of moving pieces and a lot of trust in whoever coordinated them. In the weeks that followed, I heard bits of planning mentioned in passing. A peak season weekend they were hoping to reserve, a florist recommended by one of Elaine's friends, a band Nicole followed online. None of it sounded like something I needed to add to my calendar. My own schedule was already crowded with conferences, fundraisers, and weddings for clients who had signed contracts and paid deposits. Looking back, I can see how thin the line was between my work and my sister's wishes, and how easy it was for her to act as if that line did not exist at all. A few quiet days passed before my work, and my sister's wedding stopped being separate things. I was in the office one afternoon, eating at my desk while Kiara updated the whiteboard. One Saturday still sat open, circled in red with Nicole's initials beside it. My email chimed, and a message from the Science Center's event coordinator slid to the top of my inbox. The subject line paired the venue name with Nicole's new last name. I expected a basic availability check. Instead, the first lines read like a thank you note. The coordinator wrote that the Hales were so grateful I had offered to handle logistics as a gift. She said Elaine had been touched by my generosity. The rest of the message moved on to specifics: guest count, rough timeline, space preferences, as if the question of whether I was involved had already been settled. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I forwarded the email to Kiara. She read it, leaned on the edge of my desk, and raised her eyebrows. The expression said what neither of us did out loud. Someone had decided my work cost nothing. Halfway down the email, the answer sat in one smooth sentence. The coordinator mentioned that Nicole had explained how much it meant to her that her little sister was contributing in such a big way. It was written in the polished tone of someone repeating what they believed to be fact. I sent a short reply asking if the coordinator had time for a quick call before we confirmed anything. She phoned me a few minutes later. Her voice came through bright, already imagining floor plans and lighting options. Twice she circled back to how kind it was of me to do this. I let those comments pass and steered the conversation toward things I could quantify: headcount, rental needs, service style, late-night timeline. By the time we hung up, I had enough information to build a proposal. Creating that document felt like muscle memory. I opened our template and added everything an event like this required at the Science Center: staggered crews for setup and breakdown, extra refrigeration, on-call staff in case speeches ran long, permit coordination with the venue, a senior lead on site from the first delivery to the last vendor exit. Line by line, costs stacked up. When I reached the bottom, the total came to just over $45,000. I read through the proposal twice. It was the same structure we used with every client: clear scope of work, deposit due on signing, balance due before the event, cancellation terms on both sides. I attached the file to an email addressed to the coordinator, copied Nicole, and summarized in 2 sentences what the package included and what it would cost. Kiara watched me hit send. She asked if I planned to call my sister before she opened the attachment. I said no. Nicole had already been comfortable presenting my effort as a gift. She could be the one to reconcile that version of events with the one now sitting in her inbox. The first response did not come from the Science Center. It came from Nicole, less than an hour later. Her name lit up my phone while I was checking a rental order. I answered on the third ring. She skipped any greeting and went straight into a rush of words that sounded less like questions and more like accusations. She said she had already told Timothy's parents that I would take care of everything. She described their reaction, how impressed they had been, how it fit the image they had of us as a close, supportive family. In her telling, that moment was part of the engagement story now. When I explained calmly that the venue had reached out to me as a vendor, that I had built a proposal the way I always did, and that nothing was confirmed, she did not hear process. She heard refusal. To her, the total in that document was not a breakdown of labor and equipment. It was proof that I valued money over her happiness. She framed the number as outrageous, as if I had chosen it specifically to humiliate her. She said the proposal made her look foolish, that the Hales would think she had lied, that I had put her in an impossible position. Every sentence slid away from the reality that she had spoken for me and toward the script where I was the one who had failed her. By the time the call ended, we were no longer sorting out a misunderstanding. We were standing on opposite sides of a decision my sister had made without me and expected me to fund. By the next morning, other people were involved in a conversation I had never agreed to have. A new voicemail from my mother sat at the top of my notifications. She said Nicole had been crying, that she was heartbroken I would not work with her, that I was letting rules and paperwork get in the way of my sister's wedding. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called her back. I walked her through what an event like Nicole's at the Science Center actually required: crews for setup and breakdown, extra refrigeration, staging, hours on site, the insurance that had to be in place if anything went wrong. I kept my voice steady and treated her like any other client who needed to understand the scope. She said she was proud of me for building something on my own. Then she asked if I really wanted money to be what people associated with Nicole's wedding. She talked about how impressed Timothy's parents had been when they heard about my business, how they saw it as proof that our family pulled together. In that picture, my involvement was a sweet gesture, not a contract. I told her there was a middle ground. I could scale the plan down. Fewer staff, fewer rentals, a simpler timeline that used more of what the Science Center already provided. It would still be a generous contribution, but it would not be $45,000 of free labor and equipment. If Nicole and the Hales wanted to see that option, I said I was willing. My mother did not sound relieved. She sighed and repeated that this was a once-in-a-lifetime day, that I would regret letting numbers sit between me and my sister. She said she hoped I would come around before I did something I could not undo, and ended the call. My father rang later that afternoon while I was between site visits. His voice was clipped, focused entirely on appearances. In his view, Timothy's parents now believed we had promised them something generous and public, and stepping back would make our family look unreliable. He did not mention crews or timelines at all. He reminded me how he and my mother had talked me up to the Hales, how proud they were to say I owned a company, how this was my chance to prove that pride justified. Refusing to give the services as a gift, in his mind, meant I cared more about protecting my bottom line than about the family's name. He added that people who were truly successful did not cling to every dollar when family asked for help. I let him finish, and then repeated the same boundary. I could adjust the scope. I could not run a full operation for free. I did not pad the sentence with apologies. I said it once and let the silence stretch. He warned me that families remembered moments like this, that if I chose to stand firm now, I should not expect everyone to rush to my side later. Then he hung up, leaving the implication hanging in the space where a goodbye usually went. Over the next 2 days, smaller echoes followed. A cousin sent a message about how siblings were supposed to show up for one another. An aunt forwarded a photo from Nicole's engagement party with a line about how radiant she had looked and how special the wedding would be. No one asked what I could realistically give. They simply assumed I was the one holding everything back. I was closing my laptop in the office one evening when my phone buzzed on the desk. Nicole's name lit the screen. Her message was only a few lines long. She wrote that if I would not make her wedding a priority, then she did not want me there at all. She said I could stay home, that she would find someone who understood what family meant to stand beside her. There were no questions in those sentences, no space for a reply that might change anything. For years, she had made plans that involved me without asking. This time, I had given an answer that did not fit the story she liked to tell, and she had adjusted the cast instead. I read the message twice, then typed a short response that did not try to repair or explain. After I pressed send, the office felt unusually quiet. The whiteboard schedules on the wall, the stacks of contracts, the labeled bins of gear. All of it felt very solid compared to the version of family my sister had just defined in writing. The next step came from someone who had nothing to do with my family at all. I booked an appointment with an attorney I had used once before when I updated my contracts. His name was Michael Rhodes, and his office sat near the courthouse. Kiara insisted on driving me there so I would not spend the ride rehearsing every argument I had already lost. Michael greeted us with the same calm he had brought to my paperwork years earlier. He listened while I laid out the emails from the Science Center, the proposal I had sent, the messages from my parents, and the text from Nicole telling me to stay home. I kept my explanation close to the facts. Who had contacted whom, what had been promised in my name, what I had and had not agreed to do. When I finished, he read through the documents in a deliberate way. He asked a few questions about my existing agreement with the Science Center. That contract covered logistical support for their larger events, listed my company as a preferred provider, and gave us right of first refusal on peak dates. He pointed out that I did not, at this stage, have any signed contract with Nicole or the Hales. The proposal I had sent was just that, an offer. There was no deposit, no signature, no obligation to perform. The only binding document in play was the long-standing agreement between my company and the venue. From a legal standpoint, he said, I was free to walk away from the wedding work itself. The question was how to do that without damaging my relationship with the Science Center. He underlined a clause that allowed my company to decline specific events if there were conflicts that might materially affect professional performance. He told me that family hostility and the risk of being blamed for decisions I had not made could qualify as exactly that. The text uninviting me from the wedding was especially important. If Nicole did not want me there as a sister, it would be difficult to function on site as a neutral coordinator. Michael suggested a narrow, clear response. I should inform the Science Center in writing that, after reviewing the situation, my company would not be providing logistics or staffing for Nicole's event. I would stress that the decision was based on circumstances that could interfere with our ability to deliver the standard of service the venue expected. I could also note that no contract or deposit had been exchanged for that specific wedding. He advised me to include a short list of alternative companies the venue could contact, even if I suspected they would be booked. That effort mattered if questions came later about whether I had acted in good faith. He also recommended that I save copies of every message connected to the situation in one place. Kiara and I left his office with the outline of a plan that did not depend on my family changing their mind. Back at the office, we closed my door and drafted the email together. The subject line named the Science Center and the date Nicole had chosen. The body of the message was simple. I thanked the coordinator for thinking of us, explained that we would not be able to take on the event, and referenced the clause in our agreement that allowed us to decline when conditions could compromise our work. I did not mention Nicole by name. I did not describe the accusations or the pressure. I attached nothing but a short list of other logistics firms and staffing agencies I knew in the region, with the note that many peak season weekends were already full. After I pressed send, Kiara updated the whiteboard in the main room. The red circle around Nicole's date was erased and replaced with an open slot. It was a gesture as ordinary as any other calendar change, but the room felt different without those initials on the board. The first reply came from the Science Center's coordinator. She thanked me for letting her know and said she would start reaching out to the companies I had suggested. Her tone was professional, but I could read the strain between the lines. Later that week, a new name started appearing on my caller ID. Drew Parker had been hired by the Hales as the wedding planner. He left polite messages, asking if there was any flexibility, if there was any way my company could at least cover part of the night. Each time, I listened, took a breath, and chose not to break the boundary I had worked so hard to set. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, the heat in Tampa made everything feel slower. I had my team booked on a corporate reception across town. Kiara was leading that crew. I stayed at the office with my laptop open and my phone face down beside it, working through invoices while the city moved toward the evening. By late morning, calls from unfamiliar numbers started lining up in my missed notifications. I let them go to voicemail. The first message from Drew Parker sounded controlled, but there was strain under every word. He said he wanted to touch base about the plan for the night and asked me to call him back. He did not mention the email where I had declined the job. A text from the Science Center's coordinator followed. She asked if there was any chance my team could step in, even partially, even for a few key roles. She added that she understood if the answer was no, but she had to ask. I read her message twice. In my mind, the layout of the event hall unfolded as if I were standing in it. I knew how narrow the service corridors were, how quickly a delay in one corner could ripple across the evening. I also knew the terms of my agreement and the line I had drawn after my sister told me not to come. I set the phone down and went back to my work. Early in the afternoon, a different notification slid across the screen. Jenna, a cousin, wrote that she was getting ready for the ceremony and had heard there were vendor issues. She wanted to know if I was involved. I told her I was not. She answered that she hoped people remembered who had made promises on my behalf. The ceremony took place inside one of the exhibit galleries, and my phone went quiet. When it vibrated again, the light outside my office window had shifted. Jenna's next messages came in a short sequence. The first said the bar was open and guests were clustered near it, but the servers seemed thin. The next noted that trays of hors d'oeuvres appeared and vanished in bursts, with long gaps where no one came by at all. After that, she stopped commenting on the food and described the room. She wrote that there were covered chafing dishes sitting untouched near the back wall, that staff were moving without a clear pattern, and that the coordinator kept slipping through a set of doors and returning with her shoulders set tighter each time. People had begun to glance toward the buffet stations, still empty, and to exchange quiet remarks between songs. Drew called again. This time his voicemail was shorter. The staffing agency he had hired had come in light. The caterer was trying to manage plating and setup at the same time. Without a separate team to handle logistics the way my company usually did at that venue, timelines were collapsing. He asked if I could send even 2 or 3 experienced staff to stabilize the room. I set the phone on the desk and walked a slow loop around the office. I had people who could have gone. I knew how they would move, the way they would split the floor, the speed with which they could turn a restless crowd back into guests enjoying a celebration. I also knew that I had no contract for that night, no protection if decisions made by others turned into blame, and no place at the wedding itself. I texted Kiara and told her what was happening. She replied that the corporate event was running smoothly, that the client was already asking about booking us again, and that the season ahead looked solid. At the end, she added one line: stepping into a situation built on someone else's promise would not undo the promise. As the evening wore on, the messages from Jenna grew sharper. Guests were now asking staff directly when dinner would be served. Someone near her table joked about ordering takeout, and the laughter that followed did not sound light. The band stretched songs and filled breaks with longer introductions, giving people something to watch that was not the empty buffet. Later, she wrote that Elaine's expression had gone flat, that Robert had stepped into the hallway for several calls, and that Timothy stood near the head table with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the far wall. Nicole, she said, moved between groups with a bright smile that did not touch her eyes, repeating that there had been last-minute changes and that everything was under control. The last update of the night came after the time when dinner should have been well over. Jenna said that Robert asked Nicole to join him at the edge of the room. He held his phone in one hand, screen lit with a thread of messages where my name appeared in several lines. Their voices were low enough that she could not hear the words, and the band kept playing while more than a few guests pretended not to watch. The fallout reached me in fragments. Jenna called the next day on her lunch break. She said the moment with Robert and Nicole in the corner of the reception had turned into a quiet interrogation. He had shown her the coordinator's email where my company declined the job, and the earlier thread where Nicole had written that I would be taking care of everything as a wedding gift. His questions were simple and hard to dodge. Dinner, Jenna said, never truly settled. Staff dropped plates at some tables and bypassed others without explanation. Eventually, people started ordering delivery to the Science Center. The staff at the venue documented what they could: extra labor, extended cleanup, service issues that spilled into exhibit areas. At the end of the night, the Hales received a revised invoice that included those costs. Later that week, an email from the Science Center's director appeared in my inbox. He thanked me for communicating early and for pointing his staff toward other firms instead of disappearing. He wrote that they understood I had stepped back before any contract was signed and that their relationship with my company was unchanged. It separated my name from the wreckage in a way that mattered. A note from Elaine followed. She said she had now seen the full chain of messages between the coordinator, my office, and Nicole. She did not try to soften anything. She simply wrote that I had told the truth and that other people had chosen not to. From my parents, the tone was familiar. My mother sent a long message about gossip, sympathetic neighbors, and how humiliated Nicole felt. Near the end, she mentioned the extra invoice and called it punishment for a misunderstanding. My father wrote that I had let a technicality turn my sister's wedding into a cautionary tale. He said he did not recognize the daughter who would choose policy over family. I felt the old reflex to defend myself point by point, to send screenshots and timelines until there was nothing left to argue with. Instead, I sent a short reply. I said I was sorry they were embarrassed, but I would not hold responsibility for promises I never made. I reminded them that Nicole had told me not to come and that I had declined the work in writing, with enough time for other choices. After that, I muted the family thread. Messages still came, but they no longer dictated my days. Nicole and Timothy postponed their honeymoon while they sorted out bills and tried to renegotiate with vendors. The Hales tightened how they handled shared expenses and began insisting that future plans be written down instead of assumed. On my side of Tampa, the calendar stayed full. Kiara and I walked other couples through the same event hall at the Science Center, pointing out how to keep a crowded room moving smoothly. Our crews showed up when scheduled and did the work we had agreed to. At one fundraiser, the director thanked us in person for another uneventful night. He did not mention my sister's wedding, and that silence felt like closure. I stopped going back for holidays. Invitations arrived with vague promises about talking this out and moving forward, but none of them acknowledged what had actually happened. No one apologized for putting my name on commitments without asking or for turning my refusal into proof that I did not care about them. I let those messages sit until they faded into the list of things I no longer needed to answer. The distance did not appear as one dramatic cut. It was a series of ordinary decisions. Staying in Tampa, choosing not to explain myself to people determined to misunderstand me, investing energy into work and friendships that did not require me to bleed for the relationship to survive. Over time, that pattern became my normal. My family still existed, but they no longer had access to the parts of me they had treated as endless supplies. What I learned from all of this is simple. Help means something when you choose it, not when someone else signs you up and calls it love. A gift offered freely is generosity. A gift demanded and announced without your consent is control dressed as kindness. Saying no to that control does not make you cold or selfish. It means you believe your effort and your sanity have value. If you grew up believing that love always sounds like yes, drawing a boundary will feel wrong at first. It is not wrong. You are allowed to protect what you have built, even when the person asking for more shares your last name. You are allowed to step back from people who only call you family when they need what you can provide. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If any part of it sounds uncomfortably familiar, I hope it gives you permission to draw one line you have been afraid to draw, and to keep it steady the next time someone tells you that real love never says no.